So the Hebrews adopted their story through Adam, through Cain, through Abraham, blah blah blah. But that their original sources do come out of Mesopotamia, because that's where the stories basically start. So, however, the stories got from Karsag, the Lebanon site, down to Mesopotamia, or into that region, we get the Hebrew story coming out of that area because of Abraham.
Well, I think, yes, but remember, Abraham was an inhabitant of Ur, the city of Ur. He's got 7 generations recorded in the records, so we know a lot about Abraham and Ur. His god was An. The god of Ur was An. So Abraham had no doubt who his so-called god was, and nor did any of the Assyrians, or nor did the Romans, and even Hadrian built the Pantheon in Rome in honor of the gods. The Druids and the Greeks and the Romans just had different names for the same people. So the knowledge of all the people we're talking about existed in the ancient world. It's only when we come along and we're conditioned to believe Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever, we've got a different story, a corruption of the original message. And this is where we can all benefit by going back to the more reliable record of our history. And remember, the issue really about the Torah and the Bible, which is the Hebrew Bible, which we Christians all tend to follow, that was put together by Ezra, one man in exile in Mesopotamia, after all the skilled workers had been taken to Mesopotamia because when they were short of skilled workers, that's what they were doing when they invaded people and relocating people, for very practical reasons. And so, but the destruction of the temple, we had 3 temples on the Temple Mount, because we started with the Temple of Baal in Jerusalem on that platform, and then we had the first temple, Solomon's temple, and then we had 2 others following that. But the problem for Judaism was that they followed very strictly Ezra's doctrines, which were in a modern form of Hebrew with all the words joined up. And this is why O'Brien, in translating the Torah and the first chapters of Genesis, gives us a much clearer idea of what the real meanings were. And that's what we should all look at again and see where much of this material has been mistranslated, because it originally came from the cuneiform.
Oh, absolutely, and I totally think it was mistranslated. And again, not on a religious factor, has nothing to do with any of my research. It's facts are facts. However it turns out to be, and it's more, like I said, it's more of a quest for knowledge, just to see how the shape of their heritage, or if you overlook the whole situation from the ancient world, when you're first getting into this subject and reading the Sitchins and reading everything else, you see that it's taken from Mesopotamia, and obviously in the Shining Ones, everything is from the Garden of Eden site. So, and the Sumerians wrote most of this stuff. Well, not most of it, but a lot of the epics and the stories happen to be from their area. So so it's and then the aftermath of that is where you get your religious factors. And again, aside from the religion, it's very interesting to see, I guess is the right word, how the Hebrews have basically taken those Sumerian names and made it into their own religion, going back in time from Adam. So Adam wasn't a Sumerian. He was, whoever he was, a product of Anunnaki blood and a local. And then his line through Cain, and so on and so forth, and all the patriarchs, they were basically, I guess, either from Mesopotamia or they were around before knowledge got to Mesopotamia.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
in your estimation, they were around before the knowledge, before the Mesopotamian stories were written down. These individuals, being the Hebrew patriarchs, were obviously not Hebrew. They were coming from that whole area. But
yeah, I think the whole problem. I'm dealing with this quite a lot now because we have multiculturalism in Britain, which is wonderful. The biggest problem we've had politicians who've tried to put people into boxes. Oh, I always try and do that. And one of the things that I'm really keen on and concerned about is that we must understand the history of Islam, the history of Judaism, the history of Christianity, and the history of Catholicism, and look at all the different branches, and be grown up and realize that we can learn, all of us learn a great deal from each other, and that prejudice against one group is stupid, ignorant, unhelpful, destructive. The seeds of so many of today's problems have been sown by political differences and religious differences. I'll give you one little example. I was brought up a Christian. When I was confirmed, I thought, I don't like this, there's something wrong. And I like to think that I was more of a Quaker or a militant Quaker. That's my view of things. One of my ancestors was put into prison for getting married in the Quaker meeting house. And he was so angry he refused to pay his tithe, so they put him in prison again. And this was in about 1640. And so I also come from, a lot of my ancestors come from Wales, some come from the migrations of the Huguenots and Protestants out of Europe. And I say to people, we're all immigrants in Britain, almost every one of us. Very important to remember that.
Yeah.
And we must learn from each other, and we must actually, if we all work together, then we can be one nation. But if we build barriers and wave spears at each other, then that's just asking for yet more trouble. But I did go to my local church about 3 months ago to listen to a Christian academic talking about the Synod of Whitby, which is when the Catholic Church exerted their final blow on British Christianity in 660. When they went to have a meeting about haircuts and the date of Easter, and turned it into whether we should be supporting Peter and Paul, or whether we should be supporting, in fact, British Christianity. There was 50-50 either side of that, and the casting vote by the Northumberland king put us into bed, so to speak, with the Catholic Church, and we took 1,000 years to begin to start to recover from that, which was very sad. But one of the problems I had was the lady giving the lecture started talking about pagans and heretics. So I asked the first question at the end of the lecture, and I said, I'd like to say a few words for the pagans and the heretics. I said, Confucius and Jesus both taught us that we should do unto others as we'd have them do unto us. British Christianity started, according to the Roman Catholic historians, Cardinal Baronius and Polydore Virgulo, in Britain in AD 45. Anyway, and therefore the Synod of Whitby had no relevance whatsoever to British Christianity. But I actually got a good hearing, but the point is that they'd all been conditioned into thinking that that's when Christianity started, in 660. And anything before that was pagans and heretics. And that's my own church across the road from me.
Yeah.
And this is tragic, absolutely tragic, that people can be so blinkered and have been so brainwashed over all this time.
Totally.
Really sad.
Right. Yeah.
And now the truth, I'm going to give it to you because I'm bubbling to say it. But the story of Jesus is interesting because I have some wonderful genealogical records from Vatican sources which show that Jesus was a twin brother to Thomas.
I just heard the whole episode on that. Totally. And right from Caesar, right? Caesar's offspring.
But the point was that Jesus and Thomas their father was in fact a man who became a Roman emperor.
Right. And what was his name?
The Roman emperor was always a god. So Tiberius Caesar was a god. So Jesus was the son of God.
Yeah.
Got it?
And
he was appointed King of Kings and Pendragon because the British king, Tervantius Tascovanus, had all these treaties and agreements with Augustus, who was the man who started Pax Romana, brilliant, good Roman, wanted to trade, a willing buyer, willing seller, sealed with a handshake. And that's what Britain had, right from the time of the Caesar invasion. They made peace and they did trade. And Augustus was a key figure, and Tervantius Tascovanus was the most important king in the East Anglian region. He had two sons, and he sent them off to be educated with Augustus in Rome. They then went on to fight in Germany, and both were killed. So the most important king in Britain had lost his two sons. And so Augustus and Tiberius, who was Augustus's wife's son, sent Jesus and his brother Thomas to Britain to be adopted by Tervantius Tascovanus. And therefore Jesus became king of Britain in AD 10 when Tervantius died. And he was our most successful king ever. They thought so much of him when he was 16 years old that when he came in as king at the age of 17, he was appointed the first Pendragon of the Britannic Isle. And he as King of Kings, brought peace to the whole of the British Isles, and was the most famous Welsh king under the name of Cyneflyn. He was also called Cymbeline. And after having had, up to the time of AD 27, he brought peace, trade, prosperity, terrific period in our history. Thomas was in fact the patron saint of Shetland, and the Shetland king joined in on this. Lots of other clues coming through. And then Jesus was then sent by Augustus and Tiberius to try and bring peace in Judea, where there was this rebel element in Judea hanging on to the Torah and the ideas, which was contrary to the Druid teachings. So Jesus' teachings on the Sermon of the Mount were pure Druid. He retired right about AD 27 as Archdruid. And he's still known in Rome at AD 49 as Christus, which is another name for King of Kings. And at the Council of Nicaea, Christianity is named after the principal proponent of Christianity, Christus. So we follow through. It's back to the situation of titles and names and confusion over names and adoptions. But it's a wonderful story. Tiberius Caesar was a brilliant man, but there was so much money floating around that they were all fighting over the spoils. And so we had all sorts of problems with Claudius and Tiberius' son, Caligula, etc. But in the nutshell, there is a fantastic story of Jesus' importance and how both Jesus and Thomas went to, or Jesus Kashmir, Thomas India, and lived full lives. and why Jesus today is still considered to be the most important teacher of morals, philosophy, etc., in the Druid tradition, amongst every single religion in the world, including Islam. And Islam have a grave for Jesus on his second coming beside Muhammad.
Right.
So one man can unify the world if people know his true story and what he attempted to do and what he actually achieved.
Yes, yes.
So that's my pound of flesh. I wanted to get it in because it's something that needs to be put forward as a thesis, and I let everybody else have a look at the information and the facts, and you make your own minds up.
Right, right. And
A
I did.
lot of people, not me, a lot of people have made major contributions to that story in their different ways, and it's back to putting this jigsaw puzzle together that fits.
Yes, absolutely. So that information is not in the Path of Light.
The Path of the Light was Christian O'Brien's fantastic translation of the Askew and Bruce Codices. The Askew and Bruce Codices are the principal documents on what Jesus was actually teaching to his inner circle of disciples. And it was recorded and witnessed by the disciple scribes Matthew, Philip, and Thomas, Jesus' twin brother, who were academics, skilled, very intelligent people. His disciples consisted of both men and women, and what he was teaching was Shurat Shubad Yoga, soul-word union, which the Satsangis and people in India will know exactly what that means. Jesus was considered to be a successor, an equal and a successor to Buddha. And when he went to Kashmir, two coins were minted at that time, one with Jesus' head on, one was Buddha's head on. And so the Path of Light is that magical document which O'Brien translated and produced to show and give us all the clues as who Jesus was, where he came from, what he was teaching. He was teaching what was taught in the ancient world, in the Druidic world. So Jesus was a Druid, king of the Druids. There's a book called Jesus, King of the Druids, which tells you just how sophisticated the Druids actually were. They were more advanced than the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the early civilizations. Very, very important. These messages get through.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, I just heard that. I don't know who you were talking to when you were explaining what is out there. I've seen so many of your videos. You were talking to someone, or you just were.
Yeah, I was talking on Where Does the Road Go, I think.
That's the one. Yes, that's the one. That's where, and it was just recently.
I got a few things off my chest there.
Absolutely, and respectively so. That's wonderful. And like I said, that's a whole new chapter for me personally. That I probably will go in, to research that and to go further with that.
I can make this point now that I did a learning from history on Thomas, which is learning from history part 11. I haven't got it in PowerPoint form, but I'm amending it and improving it with all the new information on Thomas.
Oh.
In particular, the link where King Alfred in Britain sent an embassy to India to pay their respects at Thomas's grave in about 890, because of those links with England, right. Arthur. Very, very important. And of course the genealogy. And learning from history part 13 is in production, and that's going to be the life of times in Jesus from start to finish on the information. But a lot more work's got to be done on both those. But I will be putting something up soon on those two. But they're the two missing lectures on these.
Is that why there's a 14 and no 13? Gotcha.
That's right.
Got you, got you. Awesome.
That'll be made clear soon.
Yeah.
As I get to update the website.
Yeah. That's nice. Awesome. Do you have a little bit more time for me?
Keep going.
Let me see. What do I have? I don't want to miss anything because I'm going to go, why didn't I ask him that? I'm an idiot. Yeah, so you pretty much covered that there. I'm just throwing this out there. Do you believe Abraham possibly was a soldier to the individual Enlil at the time? Soldier being a military officer creating an army to do certain whatever, to take out some areas for whatever reasons. Or are we thinking at this point that that's on the side of the evil Anunnaki
I think
bloodline? Do you know what I'm saying?
no, I don't go with the evil side at all.
Right.
They were all living in difficult times, and I think that Abraham had to pick up all the bits and pieces after that 2,345 catastrophe.
Right. So he had to pick up the pieces.
And he was being guided, if you like, by the man who became the Enel in charge.
Right. So
and they were recovering and reclaiming land in Canaan, I think, which is causing a lot of problems. But remember, at the same time, there were massive migrations from the region of Sumeria and the area of Ur, which was Abraham's town, and migrations were going off to South America, going to Britain, big movements of people trying to find land where there was a favorable climate.
okay, so he might have been a type of leader to not wage war purposely, but to Enlil might have been using him to establish land, or in a sense be some type of leader.
I think, yes, from the Sumerian records, we know that they had peace for quite long periods of time. But as soon as they went into difficult times with starvation and crop failures and problems, that's when people will kill and steal to keep their family alive. And therefore, those very difficult times required a strong leader, a strong person, on behalf of the Anunnaki, to traditions, to try and pull things back together again. And Muslims, Christians, Jews all look back to Abraham for the origin of their religion, and I think that's perfectly understandable. And I think it helps them all if they realize what was happening at the time, how difficult it was, how it was just another survival problem for them all, and massive loss of life, crop failures, and people fighting one another over limited resources. And this is a problem which we've seen all over the world for as long as we have any records. During the good times, fine. Bad times, doesn't take much to tip us into a situation where we fight one another.
Exactly.
And if you see what happened in 1914, with 20 million dying in the First World War and another 22 million dying from flu, which is a consequence of that war, 42 million, Stalin's 30 million, Pol Pot, Chairman Mao, 20 million, the police, and you can go on and on. We've managed to kill needlessly, if you like, or because of the trials and tribulations and conflicts and conditions, we've managed to kill about 100 million people in the last 100 years. And that isn't a very good record for civilization.
Right, right.
Particularly if we blame the Druids for killing one person.
With the arrows. Yeah.
Yes, he was shot by about 30 arrows, so he must have been a very naughty boy.
Oh, that's funny. All right, so in your eyes, then these Anunnaki gods were not fighting each other and using humans as their pawns, basically.
No,
So,
I don't think there's any evidence of that whatsoever. The nuclear war is because of all the evidence of cometary debris, and great catastrophes, which are a regular feature on this planet. We're long overdue for major cometary debris problems right now. That's why we should have lots of water in the cellar, somewhere to go to take cover, and realize that if we learn the lessons of the past, we have to start taking precautions now, because we're at much higher risk, and it really is more important than spending billions on this silly idea that CO2 causes climate change, which is a complete and utter scam, a criminal scam.
Right, right. All right, so let me ask you this then, mister.
You see, I can't keep out of politics.
Yeah. You would do some hefty damage there, but that's good. But that's a good thing. You know, this, because of this story, puts everything in the right. So you're just on the mission to spread this righteous knowledge, to say, if you just look back 9,000 years ago, this is where it all started, folks. And I understand that. It's that drive to wake people up, you know.
Yeah.
So do you think genetics has any reason, any reasoning on the Exodus? In other words, Moses leading these for a genetic reason. Enlil, he needs them to go to the land of Canaan for genetic reasons, in a sense.
I heard a very good historian give her version of events not long ago. Was that it was a story with some truth to try and give a backbone to Judaism. That's one extreme view. The other view is that, yes, it all happened exactly as they said. O'Brien goes through a number of interesting points in Exodus, and that's worth reading if you wanted to study that subject.
Yeah, I just got through his, and again, I ask you because there's always a take that I can read from the O'Briens. Now, obviously, everything that you're talking about comes from the O'Briens. But you also have this intuition and knowledge that you elaborate on it a little more, and it puts the story a little better. So, you know, and that's the other thing too, that I don't. He goes into possibly Akhenaten as the Moses.
As Moses.
Which a lot of other people do, but I buy that totally. But I wasn't sure if he never said that specifically. Like, no, Moses is Akhenaten. I'm looking for that.
Yeah, it's complicated, you see, because Akhenaten was very important. Amenhotep III, who was Akhenaten's father, did a fantastic irrigation scheme on the Nile, which multiplied the production and trade on the Nile. And therefore there was a need to build a new city, which Akhenaten did, with terrific wharfage along the side of the Nile. And at that time, the trade, Egypt was doing a fantastic amount of trade in everything you can imagine, precious metals, everything from Africa. It was a great, great center. And then, of course, it seems that there was a plague. Travelers coming in and brought an illness of some kind. We see that in Sumer too. And they had their plagues, and it caused mayhem. Akhenaten was deliberately upsetting the priests in the Karnak because they had become much too rich, much too powerful, were creating too many problems. And there was always question about which god do we believe in, and all the rest of it. They lost the plot. And I think Akhenaten was trying to take them back. I have good feelings about Akhenaten. I think that Amarna was a wonderful town. It was a great project, and I think it was much the right thing to do at the time. But he was bound to upset an awful lot of people in doing what he did. He did upset them, and then he was hit by the plague. And then the story is, of course, that he went to Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was part of Egypt at that time. And it may well be that he simply returned to Israel, if you like, or Jerusalem, because it was part of the Egyptian kingdom, and so it wasn't exactly a homecoming of the Jewish nation as such.
Right.
It was just Akhenaten not being able to do what he wanted to do in Egypt, going back to that land or to that land. I don't know. There may well have been a lot of people who, population dynamics again, many people would have moved from Canaan to Egypt and
Right.
back again. We have migrations backwards and forwards over years and years. And you've only got to look at the place names around the world. Look at all the place names in America, which are named after place names in Britain.
Exactly.
It is.
And I live in one of them. And that's funny. Most New Jerseyans don't know that. So yeah. And he was not allowed in to the land. Why do you think that is so?
Well, I think one of the most important things to realize about the ancient world is that land was allocated to people. Land was in private ownership. You weren't allowed to wander around and grab it. It had to be allocated by the Druid leaders, as they were. So anybody coming to Britain, you were given 3 to 5 acres of land to keep your family and free passage through the country. And that lasted for thousands of years until Roman privatization.
Right.
And so the common ownership of land was a key point here. And whenever there was a shortage of land or too many people, then you would get these kind of conflicts, and they could be caused by natural catastrophes, droughts, ambitions, overpopulation, antagonism, all sorts of issues. And this is why when the golden age of the city-states fell apart, then we had all manner of breakdowns in social organization, and we're suffering more breakdowns in social organization today than ever before on the planet, with more people than ever before on the planet, with a population approaching 9 billion. We're in a real muddle. We've got to stop, think, and learn from the lessons of the past. If we don't, then we're going to get hit by a very big object from space.
Yeah. That's pretty funny. All right, so I guess then at that point, then that story is not as important as it's made out to be. And now from again from a non-religious. Now I was brought up a Christian, a Catholic, so it's not that I'm siding with anything on the Hebrew side. Religion has nothing to do with my quest. My quest has to do with if these beings, if the Anunnaki were involved with people throughout the course of time and their associates and the leaders of those times. Like example, if Enlil or one of his clan, being the Enlil of the time of Moses, says to Moses, "You can't come through this area." Why would that be if it's from an Anunnaki standpoint, not God saying, "Sorry, Moses, you can't enter"? And the Anunnaki's relationship with certain individuals, and that's part of my world. That's why I'm on Abraham, and of course the Hebrews have made that story into their own, but it's not even about that. It's about the quest of why Anunnaki with Abraham. Why is it them again with Moses? What do you think they were trying to, if it was them involved with the Exodus, or if it's them involved, I guess Enlil who would be the character for both of them. So if the Enlil character was involved with either of those two men, Moses or Abraham, are they still around on the planet at that point as individual leaders telling these guys certain things that the Hebrews misinterpret as talking to God, basically?
I think that they weren't. I think that I know O'Brien thinks that in Exodus we're talking about a renegade member of the Anunnaki. I don't really go with that. I think that just population dynamics, we all of us are so clearly closely related, including the Anunnaki. They're our ancestors. And I think that a lot of material has been taken from the ancient text and used in not the best possible way.
Understood.
And I think we have to look very carefully at a lot of these stories because they don't really fit in. They're not. They don't. There's not enough common sense there for them
Right,
to
right.
fit
Well,
in.
that's my point.
Yeah, they're being used. They're
There's
being
really not a
used
reason for
to control or guide or say we've got to have a different religion to everybody else.
right.
We've
right.
started off as all Druids. Very clear. I make all the evidence for that I show in Learning from History, part 12, which is that Jesus and his brother James in Britain with the Druids. That's how I describe it. And by the way, there were 3 Joseph of Arimatheas, and that's where the confusion comes in. So the point is that I think it's really up to individuals to decide whether they want to do a bit of homework and a bit of research. I hope they do. And to realize they shouldn't take literally what they are told in all the stories that we're talking about here.
Right. Because it's not logical.
There's some terribly important information in the Quran, in the Bible, in Sanskrit, in the Hindu books. It all has to be looked at with a much wider vision to see the similarities, how everything comes from one original benevolent source, and where it's been distorted by people.
People. Yep.
Maybe like us.
Yeah, well, rampantly too. I mean, it's definitely have been distorted. Before I forget, you just mentioned that possibly the O'Brien, Christian O'Brien had thought that the renegade angel, the renegade Anunnaki leading Moses, was obviously then part of the Enlil clan. Because
I think O'Brien, yes, O'Brien produced so much information, and when he dealt with Exodus, he had quite a problem in trying to work out just who wrote it and why they wrote it and what was this story all about.
Gotcha.
And I think he felt he could use a little bit of, I was never able to talk to him about that. And he may be quite right, but I just feel that what you have to do in these situations, as you build up more and more knowledge, you tend to read between the lines.
Yeah.
And you take, this is a hard fact. This is speculative. Where can I go to find another hard fact to put with that hard fact? So you have to make your own assessments of all the various steps along this route to build up the complete picture.
Yep.
And that's difficult. Sometimes you get stuck. You can't find a piece to fit, and you go somewhere else. And but I do think we have to be very careful because so much of the biblical material are rantings and ravings from individuals trying to make a name for themselves, which is what we see throughout life at the moment.
Right. No, absolutely.
And we just hope we don't get accused of doing the same.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's it's very clear that it was manipulated, the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, to keep people in control. So the stories are exaggerated, but there is that little piece of what is the right word I'm looking for? That little excitement, but in a negative way, and it really shouldn't be. But the excitement is, wow, if they were around in that time, manipulating, not them or whoever, speaking for them, were they a manipulative voice behind the bush, speaking to Moses, to guide him in an evil way or something. So, my questions for that is because there's so much out there on that. You know, even Mr. O'Brien had touched on that. You know, within his book, because it comes from. So there's some sense of, ooh, it could be part of the Anunnaki clan interfering, not interfering, but you know, shaping
some influence, from somewhere.
Right. So
you see, there's another dimension here which we have to mention. O'Brien was very clear in the question of the transmigration of the soul. And the more we learn about science, the more we begin to realize that we live in an electric universe. We are run on electricity. Our brains work with electricity. We have incredible brains. We only use a small fraction of them. Alfred Watkins, I think, who was a great contemporary of Charles Darwin, said that we're the only species on the planet with an over-engineered brain. So that's hope. We could make a lot more use of our brains if we try hard enough. But the point is that it may well be that the fact that everybody believed in the soul and the transmigration of the soul and intelligence crossing the universe, we've got scientists telling us now that we can have a thought and it can go across the universe. If that is so, we can get messages coming back to us across the universe. So we may well be guided in some way or another. And I accept that as what modern scientists are beginning to believe, and what we've always been told, or many of us, or many of our teachers have said from the past about the soul. And certainly what Jesus was teaching to his inner circle, which is the advanced knowledge. I always, in this context, use Confucius's quote when one of his students says, "Oh, Master, what's all this about souls and what's going on up there?" And Confucius said, "We've got more than enough problems down here without you worrying about what's going on up there." Which is the best way to end it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and as far as that's concerned, I saw all of his information about that. Potentially, they were not even from this reality, they were from the different plane.
In another dimension, yeah.
Yeah, from the other dimension. So, in other words, potentially interacting with humans on a basically taking human form for a period of time. Is that what he was alluding to? It's in the Shining Ones. It's in the. He also has the chart of the different planes.
Yes.
The astral planes.
Yes.
Is in the book.
Yeah.
Was he referring to that they possibly were from a different dimension, or a different astral plane?
Yeah, he looked at the idea whether they were Earth-based, whether they were aliens, or whether there was this other plane, this other means of communication, which is about the transmigration of the soul and going to the various planes, how the soul travels and the journeys of the soul, which Jesus was teaching. And that's what he felt that was the route that he would follow. And he got a lot of help from his Satsangi master at that time and went into that in great detail. I personally, I'm open-minded in beginning to understand some of these technical issues in relation to the fact that we're part of an electric universe. We can balance our brain waves, and when we balance our brain waves, our body heals itself. That's one of the things that I'm very interested in. And this is what the ancients did. The health service provided balancing brainwaves so people weren't ill. It's a good way to do it, and we can do it today. And it had the biggest impact on our health service. It might even persuade people not to eat too much and not to abuse their bodies and not to get ill by not looking after themselves, which is another subject. But I think I'm happy with my view. Take the advice of Confucius. Let's try and worry about things down here before we worry too much about those interdimensional type issues.
Yeah, and I guess then, I know I don't go in that direction because it's a whole nother branch. You
Yeah,
know, the 9,000 year, old starting point of the civilization probably, well, to me anyway, right now, means that they were physical, because why would they be setting up irrigation and water running
exactly,
if they were not,
exactly.
if they were from a different plane? So, because they
Yeah,
wouldn't need water, basically. Um, um, or if it was an area of an astral plane, come down physical form to help us restart. Basically, that's how the interaction could be. Come down and change. Morph into a human for a while to say, hey, let's build an irrigation. Let me show you how to do it. Let me show you how to crop this. Let me show you how to do this and that and the other thing, and then leave. But I I don't really go in that direction because there's too much. Like you said, there's too much here. There's too much materialism.
you can't. You're into a speculation,
Right,
which will lead you down a dead end, I
right.
think.
And the whole fact of the matter, the most important fact, is the actual physical things that exist from this 9,000 year event. The Baalbek, the pyramids. I mean, these are the physical, the irrigation, the whole Garden of
Yeah,
Eden site from
yeah,
above. All those wonderful shots that they took, that he took, or whoever took them in the plane.
yeah.
You know,
And
those are the physical.
we
To
can
say,
go around. We can go around the world, and we can see fantastic ancient skills. The farming of the whole of the Amazon region, for example, which is one of the key discoverers, and the black earth, and the fact that they understood that if they put charcoal in with human excrement and soil and kitchen waste, they could produce wonderful soil that lasted thousands of years and still
right.
being mined as black earth. They were using technologies in harmony with the rainforest, um, far better than we do today. We destroy so much today because we don't understand the technology that they had, and we need to relearn that technology, very much so as far as agriculture is concerned, particularly in terms of maintaining soil quality and having the mixed farming they left us, our grazing animals, to mix our meat and vegetables, to have a diet which includes enough protein, all absolutely crucial.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. All right. Well, I know we're closing in on our time, but maybe I can ask you one more question.
Please, please, I can keep going.
Um, well, the speedy writing. I know we touched on that earlier.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that was any specific uh, written form of language that we know of today?
Yes. It was the speedy writing of Enoch is described very, very well by Enoch when he goes to meet the great Lord at the Eker mountain house of An and Ene Enki. And it was give Enoch, give Enoch the books and a pen for speedy writing. And later on, in other elements of history, particularly with the Assyrians, they talk about the in-house writing, the writing that was taught in the kingship schools and in-house for administration. And that was what was called the Aleph Beg. There's a wonderful reference to it in the Phoenician letters, which is a book which you've got Phoenician letters. You're way ahead of everybody. It's good, isn't it? It's a brilliant, brilliant book.
Right.
And that makes
I
it
got to be
absolutely
honest.
clear.
I do have to be honest. I just got the book, so I haven't yet been able to open it due to my time. So might be answering the question that I'm answering.
That book answers the question you've just asked me, and it sets it out very clearly. In all this time, it says, the people were given the simple picture language, picture and sign language. Rather like we're given the road signs if we cross Europe, so we can cross Europe, know when to stop, turn right, turn left, do all the things we have to do on the roads, picture signs. And it says there that the ordinary people were given the simple picture signs. But in all this time, there was the Aleph Beg, which was the alphabet, which is the skilled writing.
Is that specifically from the Phoenicians?
That's from the Ugarit tablets.
Right.
And it all makes perfect sense.
So when he calls it the Phoenician, that's because it was from Canaan.
In Ugarit.
In Ugarit, right?
Ugarit. I pronounce that wrongly sometimes, but Ugarit, I think.
Ugarit, yes.
Yeah.
So, but maybe not specifically the Phoenicians themselves, because they came a little later.
They were later. We're talking about the Canaanites and the people of the land of Canaan,
Right.
Ugarit.
See, the way that my mind works.
Yeah.
I have OCD. So everything for me has to be. Well, this is part of my OCD. You know, everything has its own order to think. Colors, matching. You know, it's hard to function sometimes as myself. My wife has to kick me in the ass and say, because I could be holding up two things and trying to decide, and she'll slap me on the rear end and say, "Just pick one." She's my the way I get through my life, basically. But so for me, the questions are also very. What could be so clear to someone else, I kind of need it to be hammered in, you know. So for me to look at the Phoenician,
you'll love that, and you've got a wonderful quote about the duty of the king, the jobs of the king. Absolutely fantastic material, and that's another marvelous book. Yeah. But the king's duty was to deliver to the people freedom, justice, leisure, and instruction. And he did that with his Druid advisors. There were no political parties, and there were no religions. He had a simple task, and it was equal rights under the law. And Plato said that democracy always leads to debt, bankruptcy, and chaos. And Mark Twain said that 10% of the people think, 10% think they think.
Yeah, I remember you saying that somewhere.
Would die rather than think. That's why democracy doesn't work. So back to the original kingship, you see. We don't have conflicts.
Yeah. Awesome.
And that's why it worked.
So, so they were using the alphabet.
Alphabet,
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was basically maybe the beginning. However, that they had translated that to.
Yes, the alphabet, the alphabet, went to Britain because that's where all the key stuff went to. Right? That's what I was saying earlier. And the alphabet, the letters, were passed from the Druids to the Greeks. And the Greeks absorbed the alphabet in about 100 years. That's from Martin Bernal in Black Athena, fantastic book, which everybody should get.
I got it too. So, what language then would, if there was any language on the planet that the Anunnaki would have spoken to each other, what could that possibly have been the closest to?
Well, our original language, you know, if you look at Sumer, we still use today 100 words, which were exactly the same words in Sumer. And there's probably a lot more than 100. You know, if you go to northern Germany, Friesland, you can actually, if you're English, you can understand what people are saying because it sounds very similar. We originally had one language, one tongue. From this evolving from a very small tight group, we have one language and one form of writing.
Right.
It was the fact that they went down in the cuneiform dissipated. As soon as the scribes got hold of it, they changed it, laid it on this side, modified it. It became something that they wrote and you couldn't understand a word, and you had to go and pay them to get them to tell you what it was, so to speak. And so it was a corruption, if you like, of the original principles. The first double entry bookkeeping, the first really important things were the Shmat Besserat tokens, which are all round the Fertile Crescent, and we find them at Jericho at those very early dates, where you made a little clay model of your 3 bags of grain or your 2 sheep, and you kept the set yourself and delivered the others to the market with the animals. So you had your own set, and they had a set from you with your name on it. And the same with tin. When they were smelting tin on Exmoor, each smelting little family group would have their own shape of mould. And so when they mined the tin and smelted it, they'd take all their ingots down to the ship or the dealer so that they could trace their own particular ingots. It would be their brand, their style. So lots of extraordinary, practical, sensible, simple things. And the basic principle of a willing buyer and a willing seller and a handshake on the deal. No bureaucracy, no paperwork, no health and safety. Just common sense.
Yeah. That is awesome. So I know that you also have you were gonna put something out on Mars. Specifically maybe some new evidence, with our circadian rhythms matching the Martian rotation. What new developments have you found?
It's a subject that I keep looking at. I think that it's Ohio University did the drawing showing they could identify river systems going into a sea, a very large sea on Mars, or claim to be able to do that. Well, if those river systems or the valleys or the deltas could be seen by them to do that, it must mean that Mars had water quite recently. And so I've got that drawing, which came from them, which is very impressive. So we know there's water on Mars, and we know there were great seas. The best information I have is from Bernard Dallaire, who agrees with me that it's more than likely that Mars lost its atmosphere at that 10,850 boundary, in the same way we lost a large chunk of our atmosphere.
Right. I remember seeing that. Yeah, and you were mentioning that.
Yeah.
So before that, then potentially, which I've been trying to investigate a long time too, with other sources, with the non-existent Cro-Magnon period of 40,000 or so, 50,000 years, and before that, with the potential possibility that maybe our physical form could be from that planet, in the interim of all these other hominid species, through the regular genetic outline of the out of Africa theory. When you're putting all this together with, at first it was Sitchin and the Anunnaki, or O'Brien's with the Anunnaki up in the 9,000 year event, taking the local population. At that point, we were already basically human. At that point, we weren't really a primitive Neanderthal or Homo erectus. And I think Mr. O'Brien here also alludes right in the beginning chapter that the possible visitation or ongoings of the Anunnaki could have been a 400,000 years ago start, and then there's a gap, and then they come back at 9,000 years ago to restart the civilization. So I'm wondering, possibly at that 400,000 year ago start, or their visitation, that I don't know if he goes into that. It's in the listing.
Well, the sort of, I think I mentioned the fact that if you increase the pressure atmosphere in a big tank and put a fish in it, it will grow to twice the size and live twice as long, which explains that we lost a chunk of our atmosphere, why we had very large mammals, very large, a lot of very large creatures in the past, because the atmosphere was much denser. And also the fact that they clearly reached such high levels of technology in their domesticated crops and all the other things, and the structures and buildings and everything, and the incredible precision in the Great Pyramid. We've got to take seriously the fact that they wouldn't have been very difficult for them to get to Mars, because Mars is right next door to us. It's the closest of our planets. It's almost identical size to us. And therefore, there's quite a good case to be made for the fact that there was an advanced civilization, or our ancestors were advanced enough to have gone to Mars and back.
Absolutely, yeah.
The experts will tell you that life on Earth was so extraordinary in terms of its development that we still could be unique in the whole solar system in terms of the kind of life we have. And so the evidence would suggest that we're very lucky living on Earth. We're very lucky to have our ancestors and history.
Yeah.
And we may well have been clever enough to go to Mars and back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is something which I hope one day we will find out. But we have to be open-minded and look at that possibility, I think.
Yeah. Do you think also we were bigger, or the Anunnaki were bigger because they were here before the 10,000?
Exactly. They were here in a denser atmosphere.
So
they might have been on Mars in a denser atmosphere. I don't know. But the point is that we have so much evidence of very large skeletons now. It's not a hoax. They're all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
The fact that they've been covered up is just beyond belief. This is the church at work again. They don't want to show that there were very large people.
Yep, yep, yep.
And I deal with that in Learning from History Part 9. I've got lots of stuff in there. Art, jewelry, and design, and the progress of humanity, or whatever. But those big skeletons, and more are being found all the time. It cannot be disputed. And they are large versions of Cro-Magnon. We're Cro-Magnon.
Now, do you agree, in your research, that the Cro-Magnon skulls are a little bit different? They're a little bit more harsher. We're a little bit more docile in a sense. So you have, Neanderthal, which is completely different. Well, not completely, but the closest of the primate relative. And the Cro-Magnon, still not us. I've done a lot of research and examining those skulls, and they are a little bit bigger,
bulkier,
coarser. So I don't know. I still believe that possibly that our physical form is even a little different than the Cro-Magnon form. Do you ever speculate that at all in your research?
Professor Peter Wegener, who used to be at Port Elizabeth University, showed me the skulls of Boskop man from that area of South Africa, which are very distinct. And it may well be that there was a cross between Boskop and Cro-Magnon. Cro-Magnon, very interesting because it's all along the west coast of Europe, and it looks as though it's people who came from the Azores, from the story of Atlantis. And O'Brien did brilliant work in that identifying that landmass above sea level. Was very, very important. So these are issues which I hope we will do more work on and find out about. But I think you're right. I think there's a possibility that there was another crossbreeding to produce us, but it's got to be before 50,000 BC. Unless it was just one male crossing with a female, I don't know.
Right. Does he go into Cro-Magnon man possibly being from the Azores, the Atlantis region?
Yeah, I think
in the book?
he does. It doesn't go into a great deal of detail on that aspect of it. I'm thinking of about somebody called Leonard, Cedric Leonard, I think it is, who's done a lot of work on Atlantis and Cro-Magnon Man. That's fantastic work. I
What
think
is the
it's
name of that one?
um, the surname is Leonard, and I think it's Cedric Leonard. I mentioned it in one of my talks.
Okay.
I think it's Learning from History Part 8. No, yes, Part 8, Art, Jewelry and Design. You may, if you Google in Cedric Leonard, I think you'll probably find his website, but he does a lot of work on this. Very, very interesting stuff.
And it was Cedric?
Yeah, I think it's Cedric Leonard.
Great.
Please forgive me, Cedric, if I've got your name wrong.
Oh, that's wonderful.
But he's a brilliant researcher, and everybody should look at his work.
Right. You have a lot posted on your site. You know, the research. He might even be on. Do you have him on your?
I'm not
sidebars?
sure, to be honest. My website's now getting on for 13, 14 years old.
Right.
I'm really glad I haven't made too many mistakes. It's being updated now, and I hope the next stage of my life will be to give a major update of the website. I'm a lot more involved now in British wildlife management, which is all the wildlife management issues I'm passionate about. The way we manage the planet and how we look after our wildlife and people. And I'm getting more involved in politics than ever before, because I don't think we're going to get anywhere unless we change our attitudes towards politics and politicians and managing things. And all the lessons are there from the city-states as to how we should do it. And we've got to remove political divisions. We've got to remove religious divisions if we're going to make progress as a civilization, as a world civilization. So that's my parting shot, my ambition before I keel over and die.
Well, that's wonderful. So, and are you back on the you still go out and do lectures?
Yeah, no, well, I don't. I have done one or two lectures recently, but I usually get filmed when I do those. But I prefer to spend a day filming now to make a much better job of my presentations. And there are so many to look at, and radio interviews and things. And I'm going to say on my event section, I'm sorry I haven't updated this for 8 years, but I found it much easier to point you guys to the Learning from History series, which I'm going to make that clear. And so, you know, that's good, really. And but we keep looking for more knowledge, and we're getting it. We're, you know, the conventional archaeologists are getting closer all the time, and if only I could get Oxford University and Cambridge University to start taking the Garden of Eden site seriously, that would be my principal ambition at the moment.
Yeah, that's a very, very important factor. That's what, yeah.
And the University of Chicago. And I tried to make contact. They thought I was a nutcase, but maybe I am.
Yeah, but you're in the good pile of nuts. So that, you know, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I hope, yeah, that would be something to witness if that does transpire, to get to that site. They're just not, I guess there's just too much turmoil right now to get close to it.
I think it would help all the different sects, the Sufis, the Shiites, the Sunnis, and all those different groups who we have to sit down and think, why are they all so angry? Why are they all so fragmented? And I think we've got to be really sensible and serious about trying to build bridges and stop people being violent and stop people insulting Muhammad, insulting Jesus, and you know, it's a two-way thing. We have to have respect for other people's wishes and views. Even if we think they're wrong, we should still respect their lifetime's work and their lifetime's beliefs. All we want to try and do is just open a door for them to look a little further and see if they can enjoy what you and I are enjoying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what are you getting? Some you're waiting on the word back if someone can get there, and
well, we've been out there to survey the site and look at it with Paul Bedson and Carl Guilford, which was very successful, very, very useful. And we've got a local organisation, very well organised local organisation called the Association for the Protection of Lebanese Heritage, listing it and showing it as a site that needs protection. We want the World Heritage people to make it a World Heritage site. We want archaeologists to go out there and excavate it and look at it. It's being destroyed at the moment, built on, and the watercourse bulldozed, and so much damage being done. It's a tragedy.
Yeah.
And we don't really know what's going to happen in Syria and the Lebanon and Israel. We can only hope that they solve their problems, because I know the water production, the amount of water being produced from desalination plants now in Israel is fantastic. So the water problems are being solved in the area for both Palestinians and the Israelis, which is a key friction point. But you know, we've all got to live with one another, whatever colour, creed, skin, whatever. It's no good waving spears at the neighbours.
Oh, you're funny. Which is true. You know, it's really true. I think generations to come, if enough of this, if this word can get to a seed planted, and at least people start thinking about it, maybe in the next generations or so, it will be seen. That's what I'm trying to do. You know, I'm hoping maybe through the music, at least you can, you know, tell a story and just plant a little seed to say, oh, what the hell is he talking about? Oh, okay, that's that. You know, it has to start somewhere. But
yeah, well, they come back about 10 years later.
Yeah, really.
But that's great.
Yeah.
It's better they come back 10 years later than not at all.
Yeah. All right, so I know I'm past my time, but I just thought of one more thing. The Jerusalem Temple Mount. I've been trying to get as much photos, because obviously I can't go there, of the platform and buildings underneath. Again, maybe for some more water storage. I don't know if I ever heard you speak about that. Is that something that you've ever took notice of?
Yes, you've got massive blocks,
Yeah, those
500
massive
ton
blocks.
You know about that. It was a temple to Baal Hadad, as was Baalbek, and was Damascus. So the Mount in Jerusalem, Damascus, and Baalbek were all to Baal.
So Baal, in your eyes, is an
Baal.
inlight
It was
sun.
the Great Lord. The Great Lord. Baalbek means the valley of the Great Lord, and Baal was the Israelites got into big trouble for worshipping Baal.
Yeah, worshipping Baal. So, what other epithets would he equate to then? Not
I think, Baal would be another name, and the name means Baal means the Great Lord, and it would be another name for Enlil, or even Enki, or El Shaddai, or El Elyon, or Yahweh himself, the leader.
So it could have been just any one of the lords.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So
Just meant the Great Lord. We can, we say the current great lord is the current living person who's in charge, so to speak.
Right, right, right.
And they would have used that for many hundreds of thousands of years.
So
And
that
Bel lives on. Bel is the same as Baal.
right, Baal is the
Yeah, and the temple or the administrative building of Baal um, existed in Damascus, the Temple Mount, and Baalbek, and then they were taken over by the Romans and called Heliopolis, the sun
right,
god.
right, right, right.
So
So
Baal, the sun god.
the Damascus site has blocks, has stone blocks.
I don't know. It's a fantastic mosque, the Umayyad Mosque, I think it is in Damascus. I'd love to go there. It's got the symbols of the Shining Ones on the two brass doors, which were put on in about 650 when it was built as a mosque. It was where they went to when Muhammad died, but to Damascus, and it was built on the site of the Temple of Al-Haydar. So underneath it will be almost certainly big blocks.
And that means, like Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the big blocks underneath. Are you thinking were also for the event?
Yeah. Yeah, well, they used the big blocks because they wanted a really solid structure. And I think that exactly the same reasons why you find these platforms all over the world is that a platform was something that couldn't be destroyed. The big stones were on top. And if you wanted to go up and take cover, you went way underneath them. And I think that if we look under a lot of these platforms around the world, we'll find certainly where they hid their valuables and where they hid from cometary debris. But I don't think we'll find much in the way of valuables because they would have been removed after the event of the cosmic problems.
Right, right. So that would still be the same thing. These things were specifically built for protection, storage, water. Especially the Jerusalem hallways were good water. The hallways that run underneath.
Yeah.
And those blocks run up vertical, and the holes are in there. Do you think that was for some maybe water irrigation?
I don't know, but I know that water always had to be a key part of survival in every sense of the word. And so water storage, reservoirs, irrigation. If you look at the sophistication of the irrigation systems and the water channels in Peru or Colombia, they're absolutely unbelievable. And I went to Grimspound, I think it's called, on Dartmoor 3 weeks ago, which is an ancient village. And that had the most fabulous stonework and big blocks. That's 2000 BC, I think, probably earlier. Wonderful village on Dartmoor where all the basic buildings were built of stone. They would have had timber and thatch roofs, but tremendous amount of stonework and terrific walls.
Interesting. And of course, the Romans and the Greeks just built upon those because they were religious.
Yeah, they built on top, and I don't know whether I've got a Gary Bilcliffe's video where he shows the Etruscans and the Pelagesians. And as you go back, you find Roman times, Roman blocks are relatively small, and then the further back you go to the Greeks and the Pelagesians, you've got octagonal blockwork, fantastic blockwork, identical blockwork in Italy and Greece, as you find in Peru and Colombia and Ecuador. In other words, the technology of block making went across the Atlantic, across the Pacific as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we still don't know how they made those octagonal blocks that fitted so closely.
So again, in your estimation, it was probably either the Anunnaki themselves building these structures, Baalbek, Lebanon, Jerusalem, Damascus, um, or the knowledge was already passed to them, like you said, the Sumerians who built the pyramids, because the pyramid would fall into the same structure.
Yes.
But
You've got to remember that this was a role society of craftsmen, trade guilds, and so carpenters and stonemasons were the two most important groups in there. And the stonemasons and the carpenters passed their knowledge from father to son and accumulated knowledge. And so if you went to a Sumerian stonemason, he would be able to build you a pyramid because it had been passed down for several hundred years through his family, through his craft or trade, and meeting with all the other stonemasons.
Right.
And we see this coming out in the great cathedrals where the stonemasons had carried all this knowledge. They built or knew how to make translucent glass for Chartres Cathedral. And that's something we find in Phoenicia many thousands of years before. That technique's been lost now. So the craft trades and guilds, every single one of them, remember over 200 craft trades and guilds at Mari, probably well before 3000 BC. And each of those trades had special skills and all were different subjects. The farmers, the stockman, the shepherd, just about everybody you can think of. And so everybody had a skill and a craft and a trade, knew how to deal with their particular problems. What we do today is we have loads of people who have no crafts, trades or skills, telling the craftsmen what not to do and what to do. And we wonder why we're in the muddle.
That is crazy. Yeah, so basically 9 things built when they were here 10,000 years ago might attribute to them, and things more later were just the passed down knowledge is basically what it would end up.
I'm sure they were very like us. They may have found secrets of living much longer, as we will eventually do.
Right.
But I think that they lived and died, and they passed knowledge on to their children through the craft, trade and guild system. Practical skills, it's very important, not academic skills. Practical skills, so they were very practical people, the highest standards of practical knowledge.
Do you think starfire gold, monatomic gold was part of their world?
Absolutely. There's very, very good evidence for that monatomic elements about 6000 BC in Canaan. I've got the letters from Professor Charles Hapgood to the head of the British Atomic Energy Commission at the time, when the head of the British Atomic Energy at the time accepted the fact that there was gold, pure gold, which requires a temperature of 5,000 degrees at 6,000 BC, and the monatomic elements, as Lawrence Gardner went into great detail in that.
Yeah.
And we get the Preceded stones, which were taken to Stonehenge, which were the highest content of the monatomic elements, which I think were used for balancing brainwaves. That's my view. And I think we could learn that technology and start balancing people's brainwaves and getting them head straight. Then bodies would heal themselves. I really think that's a serious thing for the future. And I think the stones, the Preceded stones, were bought from those mountains simply by putting them in a timber case with wheels either end. It'd been quite easy to, but you've got a wheel on there, and you could carry a very heavy stone with a good axle. I think that's how they were moved. There's nothing complicated about it.
And you think they were ingesting the monatomic?
Well, that's what Lawrence Gardner says, but I think they may have been as crazed as a lot of our drug addicts are. You know, they were on something and they took too much of it. That's why the Greeks had to, the 7 sages, one of the quotes is, moderation is the chief good.
Yes.
Nothing in excess.
Yeah, that's funny.
Know thyself. Catch the opportunity.
Wow, that's really funny.
Caution attracts ruin.
That that's part of. Yeah, I know Lawrence Gardner who goes into that as far as it's stimulating the pineal gland for awareness and consciousness.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
as far as the gold is concerned. Um, and then that could tie into this whole mining thing that we hear. The typical Anunnaki story is that they're mining like fiends, all the metals out of the earth. Maybe not to transport back to Nibiru to shoot into their atmosphere, but maybe for a more organic sense or a need for electricity, conductivity, if it's monatomic,
yeah.
ingesting, whatever. It's a more, um, and it also seems that these shops and foundations are set up potentially where there's a high volume of gold in the earth. Is that something that you buy into?
Yes, I think but gold is an amazing substance, as you know. It's not corrosive. It can be molded and shaped. It's beautiful. We haven't found anything better, more valuable. It's a store of value. When the Egyptians sold um, copper and turquoise and everything in Sinai, they were paid in gold by the buyers of those basic metals. So gold was a very, very important means of um, currency. And then we had the dinar and the byzant, the dinar circulating in the Roman world and the byzant circulating in um, the Muslim world. And they were equal weight, the gold coins of equal weight, and it was great. It was only when um, Suleiman, I think it was, in Constantinople or Istanbul, started clipping the coins that things fell apart economically. So gold has a very important, and we were on the gold standard in Britain until 1927. And we've seen what's happened to the value of money since we got off the gold standard. And it's always been a marvelous base or cover of value. I, I'm open-minded. I'm prepared to listen to Lawrence. I did listen to him. I think his lectures, you've got his copies of his lectures on monatomic gold. They're very important, and I think people should look at those. I think he did more work on it than anybody else. Certainly, Sir Alan Gardner was the man who was the great translator of hieroglyphs, who identified the bread cake, which got Lawrence onto the story of the monatomic gold.
Exactly.
And the bread cake, and all those drawings, which was monatomic gold, into a cake form, which were eaten and consumed. But I would imagine if you ate too much, it didn't do any good. And I think they may have gone over the top on it. That's really, it's just an observation. I may be wrong, but we don't. We ought to be able to test it scientifically today to see whether we're missing out on something important.
Right. Now, let me clarify too. I was under the assumption that this, if it was ingested, what Lawrence is talking about might go back to the Anunnaki themselves, or you're more thinking it was more of a human thing? Humans that basically just needed something to do. Who got addicted to ingesting?
No, I think that monatomic elements were very important. Remember that the ancients had somehow found out that the highest quality monatomic elements could be found in Carmarthenshire in West Wales and nowhere else in the British Isles. Then we had the American, which Lawrence talks about, the farmer who found monatomic elements on his farm. And that's all part of the story on monatomic gold. There's obviously something very important there which we haven't properly researched or should learn about, and that's up to the scientists and metallurgists and people it's an area which they should look at, because with all the signs are flashing, but something very important there for us to learn or disprove.
Right, 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 right. So it's something that the Anunnaki Council could have been involved with, or not. It's
I think that the very fact that they were able to um, use these very high temperatures on gold and produce white powder gold was something that they did for very good reason.
right, right, right.
Let's sum it up for that, but we
Yeah.
don't quite know what the
Quite
good
know.
reasons
Yeah, yeah,
were.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. We know that they had an advanced knowledge of our health and how to stay healthy and how to live longer. And it may well be that their technologies for keeping humans alive and keeping humans healthy was far more advanced than ours today. And that may have something to do with it.
Yeah, well, that's. I guess that was my point, where their longer lifespans might have something to do with that,
Yeah.
and the fact that they were just larger. They would be.
Yeah.
They would just be living longer.
Yeah.
And the fact that that could just be all that they maybe didn't live longer. It was just like we said before, a passed down namesake that would keep. So you would think a character like Enlil or Inky were alive for thousands of years, when in reality, it's their name that keeps going through the rest of
Exactly.
So
they might have lived for 150 years, but that's nothing in time. And the point is, they use these titles for everybody.
Exactly.
And so, as an organization, they carried the same title. We have the same titles. We have the same kings, king this, king that, king something else, and then we have mayors. And Asherah and Yahweh and Asherah, which I talked about earlier,
they're
still translates as the mayor and mayoress.
Yeah, exactly.
That lives on.
Do I've been looking through my stuff recently because I was looking for the Sumerian King List.
It's on my website on the chronology.
Oh yeah. The
L.A. Waddle. He was a Scotsman, and a friend of mine is going to do a lecture on L.A. Waddle later on this summer in Glasgow University as a tribute to him.
Nice.
And I'm being asked to go up and sort of chair the meeting.
Oh, I wish I lived closer.
So I've now got to do my homework on Waddle before midsummer. Which will be good.
Yeah, that's
But all his books are available fairly easily now.
Yeah, they are. There was a couple though that you were talking about that took me a long time to get. Actually, I had to get them through Amazon UK.
Yeah.
Over there, and I think it was The Mythology of All Races by Langdon.
Yes.
This was incredibly hard to find.
Yes. Is that good?
Yeah. As far as what I got out of it, it's an older print, but there's nothing new. It's one of the series of. There are different authors that make up the mythology of all races. Langdon was just chosen to do the Semitic.
Yeah.
So this is just on the Semitic volume only.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And there was another. Oh, the Phoenician letters. The one that this one here took. This was very difficult to grab because these are not in print anymore.
No, that's very, very, very important. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good for you.
They were hard to get. But Waddle stuff. Oh, and Black Athena, that was good. The Western origin of early Chinese civilization.
Terry and LeCouperie.
Yeah, that one you had recommended.
That's fantastic.
Parallels by Diane.
Diane Worth.
Yeah, that I have. The Shining Ones, but not the O'Briens, but the Hagen, the Shining Ones.
Yes, that was good because she produced some really interesting stuff on North Africa and Morocco.
Right.
Yeah.
You had suggested all of these.
Yes.
And
they all fit into the
They all
story,
fit
don't
into
they?
the story. Yeah, that's the important thing. And Waddle's Indo-Sumerian seals. This is a
Yes.
good one.
Yeah.
Like I said, these I just got, so I really haven't been able to stick
Yeah.
my head in it. That's why.
What Waddle hadn't twigged about the Aleph bag and the cuneiform. And that's really, really important point because they had their own parts and there was all sorts of confusion there. And you have to take that point from the Phoenician letters to understand how the picture language started, and that was for the ordinary people, which then came into cuneiform.
Right,
And
right, right.
over time, that the alphabet, the alphabet, was proceeding down the line and ended up being introduced to the Greeks by the Druids
Right. Which
in-house.
also was spoken by the Sumerians as well.
They would have used it in-house amongst the administrators, I think. Um,
Ah.
but but um, but Waddle didn't pick that point up.
So wait a minute now.
Uh,
So what would the normal people of the streets been using then?
then pictures, ordinary picture signs.
But as a communication, like to a
If
family
they had
member,
to
hey,
write things, yes.
go to the store and grab me a
Yeah,
quart of milk.
yeah,
You know
yeah.
what language do you think they were speaking?
Well, they would have used these original Indo-European picture signs, which you find in the Indus Valley, you find on Easter Island, you find in South America, North America. They're worldwide with those very early peoples.
And what? How do they communicate to each other? Is I guess my what
Well,
language?
each of the items would have had a sound, and so when you talk about head, for example, it's sag. So car is garden or car, enclosure, sag, sag head. So you would have used the picture sign of the garden as gar or gar,
So they
and then
basically
sag
spoke.
head.
So they spoke in a picture language
Yes,
sign as well. So they weren't
yeah,
really ever
yeah.
communicating in what we're calling the alphabet, the speedy writing.
No, the speeding writing was quite different. That was
Yeah,
kept separate, you see.
right, right, right.
And I think there are languages around the world that still are variations of picture signs. And see, the Chinese still use the picture language as such. It's their particular form, and the same as the cuneiform. It's so many different signs rather than a joined up alphabet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, that's Terry and Lecouprier makes the point about those Sargon migrating down
Oh,
the Silk
is that
Road.
like I said, I didn't get in there. So he's the one that makes the analogy that Sargon from
Sargon
Sumer,
the First, Sargon I,
he goes
went
straight
down
to
the
the
Silk Road
Yeah,
and took all the knowledge to China.
right.
But one of the very early shining ones, in about 8000 BC, went to China and took Italian millet, and his name was Fushi? No, I'm trying to think of it. That's one name that I can normally remember, but the most famous ancient Chinese gentleman was one of the shining ones who went to northern China,
Wow.
or the area of Xi'an on the Yellow River, I think that's right, which isn't actually northern China, it's more like middle China, south of Peking. And a lot of archaeological work going on in China, pushing all the dates of farming there back, way back.
Awesome, man. This is awesome. Well, that's really, that's all I had written down. Obviously, there's tons and tons of, things. You should see what the area on that. It looked like a nuclear explosion around me in books, because I had to make sure I had all of my.
Yeah, well, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I'm always available anytime. I've enjoyed it enormously.